And so now we're moving to the draft submission on the National Adaptation Plan. So we have Jane coming down, but we're going to get Councillor Davidson to give a brief overview because this would have come to his committee, but for timing and other things.
Yeah, other things, not timing. Thanks, Sarah. Look, just quickly, obviously the purpose of the National Adaptation Plan is to help Aotearoa adapt to and minimise the harmful impacts of climate change, and this plan will build the foundation for adaptation action, and which obviously councils will play a key role in. And given both, the real risk to our city from climate change, sea level rise, and our experience from the earthquake in red zone and the work that we've already done in this space, like this council, I think, is uniquely positioned to add a lot of value to central government's National Adaptation Plan that will benefit our communities and our future communities in Christchurch. So, look, before I hand over to Jane, I just want to acknowledge the work that you have done in this space, and also your inclusion of councillors in the development of this plan. We've had a briefing, we've had email opportunities, and plus quite a comprehensive workshop, which has been really good and created actually a very good submission. But I'll hand over to you to present it. Thanks.
Thank you. Kia ora koutou. Sarah, Tom and I will be presenting on the council submission today, but I also want to acknowledge it's had involvement from a large range of staff, and we have other people here, particularly from legal and planning, so if there are wider questions we can bring them in. Just a very brief presentation from us. So the consultation period has been those dates that you can see there, and what's been consulted on is the government's National Adaptation Plan, which sets out the actions the government will take over the next 6 years to build climate resilience. It also responds to the risks identified in the National Climate Change Risk Assessment, and those two documents will work in 6 yearly cycles over the foreseeable future while we understand and respond to climate change impacts. The final National Adaptation Plan is to be published in August this year, which is a reasonably short timeline from when the submissions will be received from across New Zealand. However, the managed retreat proposals that are also being engaged or consulted on at the moment have a longer window of time for influence. So the Climate Adaptation Bill is to be introduced late next year. So we see that as an opportunity for greater influence, and in particular recognition of the ways that Councillor Davidson has talked about. We just have a very simple slide outlining the themes in our submission, but you will have seen it as quite a lengthy submission with some detailed information in it as well. I'll just roll through these reasonably quickly. The National Adaptation Plan is essentially a plan of plans, and we are looking at the timelines around some of the actions and the plans that are set out in the National Adaptation Plan, and we would like to see greater urgency and aspiration in the delivery of some of those actions. And just to give you an example, we are looking really forward to seeing the national standards that have been developed for the limb notations that will help communities and local government work or understand more clearly what needs to go on those limbs, but that's 2 years away from delivery. So that's the sort of thing we see as potentially not occurring at a fast enough rate. As you will all be very acutely aware, there is a lot of reform happening at the moment, and we are at the moment responding to consultations from central government on all of these pieces of reform, but without that clarity that we would like to see around the future of local government roles and responsibilities. So we are asking for some greater clarity in the roadmap around that reform program. The National Adaptation Plan, there's a lot of language in there around cost sharing, and that's something that I think we would all agree across all parties does need to occur, but the language in the National Adaptation Plan is very strongly around limiting Crown's fiscal exposure. It's quite heavy on local government roles and responsibilities and lighter on those of central government. So we're really asking for fair and reasonable funding arrangements commensurate to our responsibilities. If we do get greater responsibilities as a result of the actions in the National Adaptation Plan, we are seeking recognition that funding does need to accompany that. And we have flagged the New Zealand Land Transport Program model as an example of the sort of arrangement that we might be looking at, with the ability to gather funding through general taxation and distribute it according to need across the country. Another point that we've made is around the need for tools and guidance to be designed with end users to ensure they're fit for purpose. We really welcome additional tools, guidance and information. It's critical for us to help move forwards. But to date, some of the guidance hasn't been sufficiently implementation focused, and so it has left us with a bit of a gap around how actually we aren't expected to necessarily implement some of the information that we're getting, or the tools that we're getting. And similarly, we're looking for a bit more localisation. So while we welcome an adaptation information portal, we would like that to include information that has been prepared locally around the country, so that it is speaking to the local conditions as much as possible. We see an opportunity for a more community-centred approach. The engagement, and I think this was alluded to by one of the deputations, has been quite limited in terms of its focus with communities. There's been 2 webinars focused on communities, and we would like to see, given the gravity of the changes ahead of us, a bit more of an effort to take communities along on the journey. We also want to see greater emphasis on hazards literacy. It's all very well and good, and we know this ourselves, to produce, coastal hazards portals and provide people with information on limbs, but they need the ability to understand and interpret that risk profile themselves and make decisions accordingly. So we think that's a really important component, and that hazards literacy and education needs to be targeted at people of all ages. Lastly, and possibly of most importance to us, of course, is learning from our experiences post-Canterbury earthquakes. We all went through a lot, communities and agencies, and we've all learnt a lot the hard way. And so we do think that it's important that our experiences are informing particularly the Climate Adaptation Bill, and we are a little bit missing in the current wording. So we have put forward to MFE that we would like to be a bit more involved in that. On that point, I need to raise a mea culpa. In the letter that accompanied the submission, you might have seen a reference to the Canterbury managed retreat process. I'm intending to take the word managed out. What I actually took out was the word retreat. So apologies. I had a feeling. I took the wrong word out, but that will be amended before it goes forward, because I think we need to acknowledge that we have been involved in New Zealand's most significant retreat, but it wasn't a particularly managed retreat, it was a reactive retreat. So that is something that we will change in the final wording. Our recommendation today is that you approve our draft submission, and now we're seeking any questions that you might have of us.
Right. Thank you very much. There's been a huge amount of work involved, and the Mayor has a question.
Oh, I don't have a question, I just have a big thank you. That's the one word that was in the entire document that I wanted to reference. So thank you so much for picking that up. I think the reference to it being managed retreat is not. We actually would like the optionality, and I think probably that's the question. Is the National Adaptation Plan? I know that it's a beginning stage, but it feels like there's 2 major things that you've picked up. One is the sort of absence of central government, at the table in terms of the checkbook, and the second one is that question about the other alternatives, which we are exploring in great detail around adaptation planning, because managed retreat is right at the end of that spectrum.
Thank you. Jimmy.
Oh, yes. One question. Thank you for your the comprehensive list submission and your report. My question is you particularly regarding the council submission, particularly you highlight 2 crucial points. I think that's very important. First one is take a community center approach. Second one is regarding to the central government regarding to this should be considered Canterbury earthquake experience. But I just want to know whether the office are aware a moment up to now whether have from the community or from community board have make a submission regarding to this the issue, or the other one regarding to the we learn from the Canterbury earthquake experience, whether have some other agencies, for instance like CDHB, Police St. John, Salvation Army, students, whether they have also make submission or not. I just want to know.
I'm afraid I can't answer for the agencies you've mentioned, but we know the Mural Forum, ECAN and Ngāi Tahu are submitting, and they have, in the documentation I've seen, referenced the earthquake experiences. The community boards did not take the opportunity to submit.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions from people? If not, Mike, you happy to move that? Mel, would you like to second it? Yep. Okay, so moved Councillor Davidson, seconded Councillor Coker. Is there any debate? No, in that case, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any against?
Aye.
Declare that carried. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for your work. It's incredibly comprehensive. Right, next we move to the Community Social Housing Update Report through to the end of April. So